Well, let's talk about energy supply, but first, workforce shortages everywhere. An important one coming up that we don't normally think about. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, imagine this, workforce shortages we don't normally think about. Joining me to talk about this is Rich Askey. He's the president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. When we chatted about this, I never even thought about this, but let's start more generally. Is there a teacher shortage in general? We hear about workforce shortages everywhere in almost every field.
Yeah, we've been talking about an educator shortage probably for almost a decade now.
Wow.
We've seen it increasing. We've seen less certifications being given out. We've seen less young people entering education programs at the college level. So we've seen this coming for a while. And I think now it's just because of the pandemic, there are things that are just more prevalent now.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, and here's the surprise, and you're going to explain it to all of us. Substitute teacher shortage. Now, who would normally think about that? I mean, I know it's important, but we wouldn't normally think about that.
Well, it's just taken for granted most of the time, but it's at a crisis level right now, and not only Pennsylvania, across the country. I speak to members all the time that they cannot get anyone. They're not getting their bathroom breaks. They're not getting the time that they use to plan instruction during the day. They're adding children to their classes because there's no substitute available. And now we see that there's schools that are starting to close down. You know, if you don't have anybody to transport your kids, to feed your kids, and to lead the instruction of your children during the day, then it's hard to open up that building for the day. And we all know the kids need to be in those buildings learning.
Yeah, and as you point out, the important thing, obviously, and maybe the single most important thing, is what it means to the students. I mean, if it affects their learning, I mean, that's obviously the reason for schools in the first place. Yeah,
it's a serious impact on the students. You know, stability during the day for a student is very important. And if they get to school and they have to be broken up into other classrooms in an environment where they're not used to, or they have to simply, you know, the building is closed down and they have to do remote for a day, or they're just not getting the instruction. I mean, I know of teachers that are teaching 2 classes at one time. I have a friend, she teaches earth science and physical science at the same time. She uses the library and she has one class over here, one class over here,
so she runs back and forth
at the same time all day long.
Oh my gosh, I had enough trouble teaching one course. I don't know how you would teach 2.
Yeah, I can't imagine it myself.
And there is an act passed in 2021 that does provide more staffing options, correct?
Act 91 was just signed by Governor Wolf in December, and this is a good, strong first step in resolving this problem. It broadens the pool of people that are available to substitute in our schools. It allows those that are already in the building substituting, it allows them more days that they can come in and substitute. So it's really a smart move.
Does it make sense to allow, I'll put it this way, professionals that are college educated but who might not have the teaching background, you know, with education courses, to substitute or even teach, but guess what? Then allow them to do the education courses while they're teaching. Is that a possibility?
That's actually been being done for quite a while. The state has a program called emergency certification where people can get their certification in an area and attend classes while they're doing that. Of course, they have to be passing those classes, they have to be taking them, and they're evaluated on a regular basis by administration to make sure the best instruction is being given.
I didn't know how common it was. That's the bigger question.
It's not super common, but it's there, but it makes sense. These are people that have a background, they are educated, and they have to, in order to do that, like someone who has a degree in something else, at a minimum they have to take what is called like a guest teacher program, professional development. So they're given some background before they enter the classroom.
And the pandemic has made this far worse.
The pandemic has just made it much worse. Like what we're seeing now is we have teachers that have to quarantine during this present variant that's out there. And so we have more staff that are out right now. But even before this variant, we were seeing it and hearing it from our members. We just need to get more substitutes, and this is one way to do that.
Well, we're going to run to a break, but when we come up, this topic always comes up. It's what they get paid, and we'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, Rich, in addition to broadening the staffing options available to schools, it wouldn't be us if we didn't have to talk about money, and that is to pay the substitutes better. Is their pay that poor that it needs to be increased to attract more people into the situation where they are available?
It absolutely is very low on the scale for the responsibilities that they have during the day. But there is an option out there for districts, and that is the American Rescue Plan has brought $5 billion into Pennsylvania, and some of that money, a fraction of that money could be used by school districts to increase the substitute pay. We have seen, I know of a district out west that increased the substitute pay, and now they are getting substitutes that they need while the districts around them that chose not to are not getting substitutes.
Talk about the money. I mean, a good bit of that remains, as you point out, unspent.
Unfortunately,
it's in reserve somewhere. And
this is a pot of money that is available to use over the next several years. And we have been encouraging our members to speak with the local administrations about how we can use that money, ways that it can be used to enrich the children's education. And we're not seeing the results that we would like to in schools that have submitted plans and just asking for the money.
Well, listen, the governor is going to deliver his budget message shortly, and obviously that's very relevant to the subject we're talking about. What do you want out of that?
Well, I think we have to start off by recognizing that Governor Wolf has done a very good job for public education and increasing about to $1.8 million a year increase in public education funds. Of course, we started very low, so we still have some place to go as far as the need and the investment in public schools. So we're looking forward to hearing what the governor's ideas are, and we're ready to engage in the conversation with the people that we need to.
Yeah, I think most observers would agree that education is likely to be increased in the budget, given the reserve. I mean, there's plenty of money now. They're not talking about tax increases. They're talking about spending the reserve and spending the money, a good bit of it from the federal government, correct?
Well, yes, and what a better time to do it when we're trying to fill in those learning pauses that the children had during the pandemic, catch them up, take care of their health, their social and emotional well-being. When more resources are needed by schools than ever before, this would be the time to make a stronger investment.
Yeah. Now, what about college students and soon-to-be graduates as part of the workforce in schools?
Well, I have to tell you, this is very personal to me because I went to college in New Jersey, and I substituted for Princeton School District when I started out in my profession, when I was still taking classes. I think it's a great idea. These are people that have experience in classroom. They've been student teaching. They've been doing practicums. They've been taking the courses. They're anxious. They're ready to go, and it gives them the work experience they need. And
that's a great point.
Yeah.
The work experience is a great point.
Mm-hmm. It gives them the work experience, and it gives right now with the substitute shortage, I wouldn't mind my child having someone who is in a program and has had some experience substituting.
Well, they certainly have a good bit of excitement too, because it's new and they're coming into it. And we can all remember our days starting out.
Oh, yeah, I think so. That was a long time ago.
And there was a lot of nervousness too when we got into it.
It's a very nerve-wracking day the first time you're in front of that classroom alone for the first time.
Well, I'll tell you, I want to thank you for coming in. I am still amazed at this subject, something we normally wouldn't think about. All right, let's talk about energy supply. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Crossstate Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, joining me is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We bring Terry on to talk about all things energy. And I'll tell you, as I think you've pointed out on a number of occasions, the growing challenge of balancing three things. What are the three things?
Yeah, when it comes to energy, Terry, when you look at what's important to people, I think there's at least three things you can say. You know, they want energy to be affordable. They want it to be reliable. They want, when they hit the switch, they want the power to come on. And they also want it to be protective of the environment. And with climate change and the debate about climate change, that's becoming a difficult balance to reach.
Yeah, I would think so. And given what we've had with the weather, and you know, they're talking about what the warmest winter, we might get our first snow shortly. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, it's truly a huge debatable point, as you, I think, accurately pointing out. The other aspect about this is, and I've always thought this to be true, is Pennsylvania has been one of the most important energy producing states in the entire nation.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. We're one of the largest electricity producers. I think we're the largest electricity exporter in the country. So we really help the entire region in that way. The first oil well was drilled here. And of course, with the Marcellus, now we're the second largest natural gas producer in the country, second only to Texas. So yes, we're a huge state when it comes to all forms of energy.
Yeah, and the natural gas has been more in the news, I think, than any other form. It used to be, we went through the nuclear period during the Thornburg era, particularly after, you know, the situation that existed with a nuclear power plant just south of Harrisburg, yes, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, in Europe, though, interestingly, they're having that debate about natural gas and nuclear right now. The European Union just put out a statement or a policy that said that natural gas and nuclear can both be considered to be green. And the reason for that is that France really heavily relies upon nuclear. Germany, which is trying to close its coal plants and which has decided it's going to close all of its nuclear plants, needs natural gas from Russia in order to keep the lights on, basically, because you can't. They're trying to shift to wind and solar in Germany, but you can't do it with just that because they don't operate 24/7. You need something that's going to be the workhorse of your system that's going to be there at all times.
What I found pretty interesting is that some Democrats support natural gas and some do not. Probably politically more Democrats have a problem with it than Republicans, and I'm sure you're aware of that. The fact of the matter is, however, and I've said this over and over again, Governor Wolf is a strong supporter of natural gas. Now he's concerned about what happens in the pipelines with, you know, the spillage, the outage, and what that does to the environment. And even, and I've said this before on the program, a guy named Joe Biden, when he was a candidate August a year ago, went out to Allegheny County and said, "I'm for fracking." Now, you didn't hear anything else about it, given the significance of it in our state.
Right, but there's a diversity of views on that within the Democratic Party. Some people just view any type of fossil fuel as being dirty. You know, in fact, one of the things I have some difficulty with, Terry, is this whole idea of clean energy. People talk about, I mean, politicians talk about clean energy a lot. But really, if you look at any of these forms of energy and you try to look at them objectively, you can see that they all have strengths and weaknesses. And so, you know, we need to take a more nuanced look at it than that. For example, wind and solar, as I mentioned, it's true, when they're operating, they don't use fuel, so they don't have any emissions. But there are fuels used in producing those things, the solar panels. And furthermore, they can't operate 24/7. So, you know, they might be, you might view them as being protective of the environment, but where are they in terms of reliability? I don't think you can reliably run a system on intermittent sources.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We're going to talk about seeds of a crisis. I may come back with a question or two on the subject we're talking about, and we'll get to those after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Welcome back. Well, one of the big debatable points, as I think you point out, has to do with how quickly renewables should be replaced by wind and solar, and how quickly can that occur?
Well, I don't think there's ever going to be a complete shift to those technologies. I think we're going to get more and more of them in our system, but we're going to have to reach a balance at some point between how much we rely on those sources, which again are intermittent, versus plants that can operate 24/7. Now, the solution that some folks will say for the intermittent nature of renewables is to have battery storage, so that you can store it, you know, when the wind's blowing and sun's shining, you can store it in a battery, and then at night, for example, you can run the system off the battery. But the problem is those batteries, they can only store energy for a couple days. And they're not very economical either. So we do not currently have the technology to run the system on those kinds of resources. So we need a balance.
Yeah, I'm surprised that nuclear power hasn't emerged since it's carbon free. Has that surprised you? I know that we've had, you know, some problems with the nuclear power plants. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that I think is pretty inconsistent is some environmental. Now, not all environmentalists feel the same about nuclear. Some are okay with it and favor it. Others are not. But, you know, if they really believe that climate change is an existential crisis, as they sometimes say, how can you be against nuclear, which doesn't emit any carbon? Shouldn't we, and those plants can run 24/7. You know, but the problem is, I think a lot of people think that nuclear ought to continue. The problem is, how do they do that in the marketplace? Because they don't get any credit for the fact that they don't emit carbon right now, because we don't regulate carbon emissions. So, you know, that's one of the problems with nuclear. They've more and more the industry has tried to get subsidies, but and of course we had a big debate in Pennsylvania about that a couple years ago, and a law was not passed, and as a result, TMI closed. So figuring out the policy that keeps them operating is a tough point.
Well, let's talk about what you refer to as the seeds of a crisis, which you say there's a danger if that occurs. What's your point of view?
Well, my point of view there is what you see starting to happen, and I hope it doesn't continue or get worse, put it that way, is there's a movement on the part of some of the environmental groups to try to stop any infrastructure that has to do with natural gas or with fossil fuels. And also there's a movement to divest, where institutions like colleges for universities, they're facing pressure to not invest anything in any company that has anything to do with a fossil fuel, including gas. The problem is, if we cut off and stigmatize these sources, which we rely upon now for affordable and reliable energy, and there's no investment there, and we just take the hope, that we're going to be able to rely on wind and solar all the time, we're sowing the seeds of a crisis down the road. Because if that investment dries up, you don't turn energy systems around quickly. They are very capital intensive. They take a long time. So, we really need to be careful that we don't make policies which are going to create problems down the road.
Well, your point is that energy can only be stored for a short period of time, and would you argue that's the problem with wind and solar, that it comes and goes depending on?
Yes, again, and Terry, it's to my point that I mentioned before. All forms of energy have strengths and weaknesses. With nuclear, the nuclear waste is an issue. There's no question that it is. But there's also no question that wind and solar have a problem in that they're intermittent. And you can't, under current technology, in my opinion, you cannot rely on them to be the backbone of your system. You need other sources to back them up if you want energy to be affordable and reliable.
Yeah. Well, as you also point out, you would argue that a balance is needed.
Correct.
Well, explain the balance.
Well, the balance is you need to consider the environment. And, and I'm not a climate denier. We need to have sensible policies to move towards reducing emissions. Whether or not we're ever going to completely eliminate them, I'm not quite so sure about that. But you do need to protect the environment. You need to look at the climate, but you can't lose sight of affordability and reliability too. And I think so. You have to balance those considerations. And I think similarly, we're going to need a balance between renewable sources and natural gas and coal if we want to keep the lights on.
Yeah. The other aspect of this is the importance of the current energy supplies to the economy of the state. I mean, I think that's one of the fundamental reasons that Governor Wolf is a supporter of natural gas, because of its significance, creating jobs, and we can go through a whole variety of other things.
Oh, absolutely, Terry. And sometimes I'll hear some of the more extreme environmentalists say that gas hasn't helped the state. And as somebody who works with the utilities, your utility bills have been much lower over the last 10 years than they were before that because of this natural gas. Natural gas bills have been about 25% lower, because of the Marcellus. You mean that doesn't have benefits to people, especially low-income people? It surely does.
Well, the other aspect that gets pointed out time and time again is the fact that if you have a natural gas, if you have that activity going on, look what it does to supply people with jobs. The people who work in it have to eat. They have to get all kinds of other resources that make available to them. Correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on, and you'll keep us posted and with additional updates. All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.